A man worth an estimated $12 billion, the kind of man whose signature can move markets and whose name is whispered in boardrooms from New York to Tokyo, sat hunched over in a worn-out booth. To the world he was Alexander Davenport, a titan of industry. But tonight, in this forgotten diner called the Gilded Spoon, he was just Artie, a man with tired eyes and clothes that had seen better decades. He ordered the most expensive item on the menu, a New York strip steak, an act of defiance against his own disguise. But as the waitress placed the plate before him, her fingers brushed his leaving behind a small folded napkin. It wasn't a bill. It was a note. And the 7 words written inside would unravel his entire world. The smell of stale coffee and grease hung heavy in the air at the Gilded Spoon, a smell Alexander Davenport hadn't experienced in over 30 years. It was the scent of his youth, of desperation, and dreams forged over lukewarm cups of coffee he couldn't really afford. He'd built his empire Davenport Industries from nothing, a sprawling conglomerate of tech logistics and private equity. Now he was playing a part, a self-imposed penance and a test. His company had acquired a massive restaurant supply chain 6 months prior, and the Gilded Spoon, a historical anomaly on their books, was part of the deal. Corporate reports flagged it for inefficiency and low profitability. The recommendation from his executive board, led by a shark named Peterson, was simple: liquidate the asset. Sell the land. But Alexander couldn't sign off on it. Not this place. This was where it all began. So he became Artie. He'd spent 2 days growing out his stubble at Silver Flex, a testament to his 58 years. He swapped his Patek Philippe for a cheap Timex, with a cracked face, his bespoke Italian suit for a faded flannel shirt, and worn corduroys sourced from a thrift store. He even practiced a slight limp, a reminder of a long-forgotten construction accident from his youth. He needed to see it for himself, to feel if any of the magic, any of the soul remained, before he condemned it to become another glass and steel condominium. The bell above the door chimed a tinny, cheerful sound that felt out of place with the diner's weary atmosphere. A young woman with a tired but composed face approached his booth. Her name tag read Jenna. Her hair was pulled back in a severe ponytail, and there were faint, dark circles under her eyes, but she moved with a practiced efficiency that Alexander, a connoisseur of human capital, immediately respected. "What can I get for you, hon?" she asked, her voice raspy as if she'd been speaking for 12 straight hours. "Coffee black. And a menu," he mumbled, keeping his eyes down. She returned moments later, placing a thick ceramic mug on the table. The coffee was bitter scalding, exactly as he remembered. He scanned the laminated menu, the prices seeming absurdly low. He could buy the entire diner with the loose change he sometimes forgot in his real trousers. "Ready?" she asked, pencil poised over her notepad. "I'll have the New York strip, medium rare. And a glass of your best red wine," he said the words, feeling foreign, in his Artie persona. Jenna's professional mask flickered for a nanosecond. Her eyes briefly scanned his worn clothes, the scuffed boots, then back to his face. A man who looked like he was 1 paycheck away from disaster was ordering the $30 steak. It was an anomaly. Most of the patrons nursed coffee or ordered the daily $10 special, but she simply nodded, her expression unreadable. "Medium rare." "Coming right up," she said, turning away without another word. Alexander watched her go. She was sharp. He'd seen the calculation in her eyes. It was the same look he saw in junior analysts trying to suss out a market trend. For 20 minutes, he sat in silence, absorbing the sounds of the diner, the clatter of cutlery, the low murmur of conversations, the sizzle from the kitchen. He felt a pang of nostalgia, so sharp it was almost painful. This was real. His life of sterile boardrooms, private jets and catered galas felt like a phantom limb in comparison. Jenna returned with his steak. It was plated simply, but the sear was perfect, and the aroma was rich and savory. She set it down in front of him. "Anything else for you?" she asked. "No, this is perfect. Thank you," he said, finally, looking her in the eye. It was then that it happened. As she turned to leave, her hand, holding a folded napkin, swept across the table. It was a fluid, almost invisible motion. She didn't break her stride. Her fingers brushed the back of his hand, and the napkin was left behind next to his water glass. It was deliberate. An icy dread, an emotion he hadn't felt in decades, coiled in his stomach. No one knew he was here. His disguise was perfect. His own head of security. Benjamin Carter only knew he was conducting a personal audit somewhere in the city's West End. His heart hammered against his ribs. Was he made? Was this corporate espionage? Had Peterson, his ambitious COO, put a tail on him? His mind, a finely tuned machine for assessing threats, spun through a dozen scenarios. He waited until Jenna was on the other side of the diner, taking an order from a family with 2 restless children. With a hand that trembled slightly, he picked up the napkin and unfolded it under the table. The handwriting was neat, feminine, and urgent. 7 words in blue ink. "They know you're here. Don't eat the steak." Alexander Davenport stopped cold. The fork in his hand clattered onto the plate. Every muscle in his body went rigid. It wasn't just a warning. It was a statement of impossible knowledge. They knew. But who were they? And how, in God's name, did this waitress know to warn him? He stared at the perfectly cooked steak, a piece of meat he was about to eat, and a cold sweat broke out on his brow. The gilded spoon wasn't just a nostalgic relic from his past anymore. It was a trap. The world seemed to shrink to the dimensions of the worn vinyl booth. Alexander's mind, usually a fortress of logic and calculation, was a maelstrom of confusion and adrenaline. The steak, which moments before had represented a simple indulgence, now seemed sinister, a centerpiece, in a play he didn't know he was starring in. He stared at the note again. "They know you're here." The words implied a level of surveillance that was terrifying. "Don't eat the steak." A direct, specific, and potentially life-saving command. His first instinct was to flee, to drop a $100 bill on the table and disappear into the night, back to the sterile safety of his penthouse and the protection of Benjamin Carter's security team. But that wasn't the man who had built Davenport Industries. The man who had faced down hostile takeovers and corporate raiders didn't run. He analyzed. He confronted. He subtly pushed the plate away. He took a sip of water, his hand now steady, his mind shifting from shock to strategy. He had to understand the threat. Who was the waitress, Jenna? Was she a friend or a foe, using a clever double blind? And what was wrong with the steak poison? It seemed theatrical, something out of a Cold War spy novel. But in his world of high-stakes finance and ruthless competitors, it wasn't impossible. His life had been threatened before, albeit through lawyers and stock manipulation, not potentially tainted food in a greasy spoon diner. He needed more information. He caught Jenna's eye across the room. Her expression was a carefully constructed wall of professional indifference, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. She was watching him. She knew he'd read the note. He decided on a plan. He would play the part of a disgruntled customer. It was a risk, but it was the only way to communicate with her without raising suspicion. He waited another 10 minutes, making a show of poking at the steak with his fork, a grimace on his face. Finally, he flagged her down. "Is there a problem with the meal?" she asked, her voice quiet, almost a whisper. The family in the next booth was arguing about homework, providing a convenient curtain of noise. "Yeah, there's a problem," Alexander said, his voice low and gravelly, playing the part of Artie. "I think this is off. It tastes funny." He hadn't taken a single bite. It was a blatant lie, a signal. Jenna didn't apologize or offer to get the manager the standard responses. She just held his gaze. In her eyes, he saw not the concern of a waitress, but a flicker of confirmation. She understood. "I'm very sorry about that, sir," she said, her voice now at a normal volume. "Let me take that off your bill. I'll just get you some more coffee." She whisked the plate away. It was a masterful move. The evidence, if there was any, was now gone. He watched her disappear into the kitchen. Was she disposing of it? Warning someone he was flying blind? When she returned with the coffee pot, she leaned in close, ostensibly to fill his cup. The aroma of coffee was a cover for her words, spoken so softly they were barely a breath. Back alley. 10 minutes after closing. "We close at 11. And then she was gone, moving to another table to refill water glasses. It was done. A clandestine meeting had been arranged. The stakes of his sentimental journey had just been raised to a level he couldn't comprehend. He paid for his coffee with a 20, leaving the change, and walked out into the chilly night. He didn't go far. He found a darkened doorway across the street, a perfect vantage point to watch the Gilded Spoon. He pulled the collar of his jacket up the unfamiliar scratchy wool, a poor substitute for his usual cashmere overcoat. From his hiding place he made a call. "Ben," he said, into his phone, his voice a low growl. "Mr. Davenport, is everything all right, sir? You're off schedule." Benjamin Carter was the calm in every storm, a former Secret Service agent whose loyalty was absolute. "I need you to do something for me, Ben. Off the books. Absolute discretion." "Of course, sir. There's a waitress. Her name is Jenna. Last name might be on the payroll. She works at the Gilded Spoon on 14th and Elm. I need everything you can find on her. Family finances, associates, social media, everything. I want to know who she had for breakfast this morning, and I need it an hour ago." There was a slight pause. "Sir, is there a threat I don't know?" Alexander admitted the uncertainty galling him. "There's more. Run a full deep background check on the diner's manager. I also want a mobile toxicology team ready to deploy. I have a sample of food that I need analyzed under the highest priority. It's in a trash receptacle in the kitchen of the diner. I'll dispatch a retrieval team. Disguised as city sanitation workers, they'll secure the entire block's refuse within the hour," Ben said without missing a beat. "Anything else, just be ready, Ben. I feel like I just walked through a door I didn't know existed." He hung up. The cold of the street seeped into his bones. 11 o'clock felt a lifetime away. He watched the last of the customers leave the diner. The lights inside dimmed. A few minutes past 11, the front door locked, and a portly man in a stained white shirt, presumably the manager, walked out, got into a late-model sedan and drove away. Then the back alley light flickered on. It was the signal. Taking a deep breath, Alexander Davenport, the billionaire disguised as a nobody, slipped out of the shadows and walked toward the alley. He was walking toward Jenna, the waitress who had saved him from a threat. He didn't understand a woman who was either his salvation or the most elaborate trap he had ever encountered. His hand instinctively went to the inside of his jacket, where a small, heavy object would normally be. But he wasn't Alexander Davenport tonight. He was Artie, and Artie was completely, terrifyingly on his own. The alley was narrow and smelled of bleach and old grease. A single bare bulb cast a sickly yellow glow over overflowing dumpsters and graffiti-scarred brick walls. Jenna stood near the back door, her arms wrapped around herself, not from the cold, but from nerves. She was no longer the composed waitress. She was a young woman in over her head, her face pale in the dim light. "You came," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You gave me a compelling reason to," Alexander replied, stopping a safe 10 feet from her. He kept his posture stooped, his voice low, maintaining the arty persona. "Who are you? And who are they?" "My name is Jenna Kowalski." She began, her eyes darting nervously toward the mouth of the alley. I shouldn't be doing this. If who finds out, Alexander pressed his patience wearing thin. "Donovan." "The manager," she whispered. "He's the one. He told me to watch for you." Alexander's blood ran cold. The trap was even more intricate than he'd imagined. "He told you to watch for me. He knows who I am." "Not you specifically," she corrected hastily. He described you. A man older looking down on his luck, but someone who would order something expensive. Someone who didn't fit. He said a special guest was coming tonight. He said when he arrived, I was to add a special seasoning to his food. From a little vial he gave me. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a tiny glass vial filled with a clear, odorless liquid. She held it out with a shaking hand. "This. I was supposed to put this on your steak." Alexander stared at the vial. Proof. Tangible, horrifying proof. Ben's toxicology team would have a field day with this. "Why didn't you?" he asked, his voice softer now. He wasn't just dealing with a threat. He was dealing with the woman who had defied it. Jenna's eyes filled with tears. "Because of my mother." Her name was Laura. Laura Kowalski. The name hit Alexander like a physical blow. Laura. It had been 35 years, but the name still held a power over him, a key to a part of his life he had locked away and buried under decades of ambition and success. Laura Kowalski. His first love. The woman who had believed in him when he was just a brash kid with impossible dreams long before the corner office, the billions the Davenport name meant anything. Laura. He breathed, his disguise momentarily forgotten. Jenna's eyes widened. "You remember her?" We were close. A long time ago," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "What does she have to do with this? She passed away 2 years ago. Cancer." Jenna said, a fresh wave of grief washing over her face. "But before she died, she told me stories about her youth, about a brilliant, ambitious young man named Alex she once loved, a man who was going to take on the world. She kept a picture. It was old and faded, but the eyes were the same. When Donovan described the man who was coming tonight, and then I saw you, I recognized you from my mother's photograph." Alexander was speechless. He hadn't just stumbled into a corporate trap. He had stumbled into a ghost from his own past. He and Laura had lost touch after a bitter argument. He'd wanted to chase a high-risk tech venture in California. She'd wanted a stable life. He'd chosen the venture. He'd always told himself he'd go back, make things right, but by the time he had the means, he'd heard she was married. Pride and time had done the rest. "My mother Jenna," continued her voice, gaining strength. "She made me promise something. She said the business world was full of sharks, and that the partner you started with, a man named Silas, was the most dangerous of them all. She said the official story was that he died in a factory fire, but she never believed it. She always said Silas was too clever to die and too evil to rest. She made me promise that if I ever crossed paths with you, I would warn you that the ghosts of the past never stay buried. Silas Varga." The name was acid on his tongue. Silas was his first partner, a volatile genius who had been the co-architect of their first piece of revolutionary software. The factory fire had been ruled an accident. Alexander had been devastated, but he'd used the insurance payout to found the precursor to Davenport Industries. He had built his empire on the ashes of that tragedy. Donovan Alexander pressed his mind racing to connect the dots. "What's his connection to Silas? I don't know for sure," Jenna said. "But he makes phone calls. Late at night in his office. I've heard him say the name Varga a few times. He talks about stocks, about network access, about something called Project Nightingale." The word struck him like lightning. Nightingale. A code word. He and Laura had used it. They were bird-watching in a park once, when they witnessed a mugging. They'd agreed that the nightingale sings at dawn would be their code for imminent danger, a phrase innocuous enough to be said over the phone. How could Donovan be using it? His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Ben. He glanced at it. Jenna Kowalski, age 28, single mother son. Daniel, age 6, has leukemia, undergoing treatment at St. Jude's. Massive medical debt. Works 2 jobs. No criminal record. Mother Laura Kowalski, deceased. Father, unknown. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Jenna's desperation. Her son's illness. This wasn't just about a past promise. It was about a mother's fierce, protective love. Donovan, or whoever was pulling his strings, likely had leverage over her, but she had chosen to honor her mother's memory instead. She had chosen to save him. Jenna Alexander said his voice, now stripped of any disguise. It was the voice of Alexander Davenport, the commander. "You've taken an incredible risk. The man you're talking about, Silas Varga. I thought he was dead." "My mother never did," she replied simply. "Project Nightingale. That was my company's internal code name for a complete overhaul of our financial security systems." Alexander thought aloud, his blood turning to ice. "It's a top-secret project. If someone had access to it." He looked at Jenna, at her tired, terrified face. This single mother, this waitress, hadn't just saved his life. She might have just saved his entire company from an enemy he thought had died 30 years ago. "You and your son are not safe," he said, his tone grim. "From this moment on, you are under my protection. We need to get you out of here." Before Jenna could respond, the sound of a car engine turning over echoed from the street at the end of the alley. A pair of bright headlights sliced through the darkness, pinning them in their glare. The car wasn't leaving. It was waiting. They had been seen. The headlights sat there, unmoving, 2 malevolent yellow eyes, holding them captive in the alley. Alexander's mind, honed by decades of crisis management, snapped into focus. Panic was a luxury he couldn't afford. "Get back inside. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me," he commanded Jenna. His voice, a low, urgent whisper. He gently pushed her toward the diner's rear entrance. "What about you?" she asked, her eyes wide with terror. "They're here for me, not you. Go, now." Jenna hesitated for a fraction of a second, then slipped back inside. The heavy metal door clicked shut, the deadbolt shooting home with a loud thud. Alexander was alone, bathed in the car's high beams. He didn't run. Running would only confirm his importance. Instead, he resumed his arty persona, squinting into the lights, as if annoyed, raising a hand to shield his eyes. He started walking slowly toward the street, a slight, weary limp in his step, feigning the indifference of a man who just wanted to get home. The car, a black sedan with tinted windows typical of the kind used by security details and government agencies, remained stationary. He was being watched, assessed. As he drew closer, the passenger side window slid down with a quiet hum. He couldn't see the face inside, just the dark silhouette of a man. "You're out late, old man," a voice said, smooth and menacing. "Some of us have to work for a living," Alexander grumbled, not breaking his stride. He kept his eyes on the sidewalk ahead, projecting an aura of someone who wanted no trouble. "That's a nice watch," the voice said. Alexander glanced down at the cheap Timex on his wrist. It was a test, a ridiculous amateurish test. They didn't know who he was. They were just confirming he was the target Donovan had described. "Wife got it for my birthday." He lied. "Means the world to me." He was almost past the car now. He could feel the intensity of the gaze from the window. He braced himself for a door to open, for a hand to grab him. Nothing happened. As he reached the corner, the sedan's engine revved once, and it pulled away from the curb, disappearing into the city's late-night traffic. He was in the clear for now. But it was a chilling message. They had eyes on him. They had been watching the diner. The meeting in the alley had been compromised. Alexander walked another 2 blocks, making several random turns, before ducking into the lobby of a nondescript hotel. He took the elevator to the 10th floor, walked down the hall, and took a service elevator back to the lobby, a simple maneuver to foil any unsophisticated tale. Only then did he call for his own car. 15 minutes later, he was sliding into the plush leather interior of his armored Maybach. Benjamin Carter sat in the passenger seat, his face a grim mask. "Report," Alexander snapped, stripping off the flannel shirt as the car sped silently through the city. The toxicology team secured the steak and the vial from the diner's trash. Ben began handing Alexander a tablet. "Preliminary results are in. The liquid is a custom-formulated compound, not a poison in the traditional sense. It's a powerful, fast-acting, neurolytic agent. It wouldn't have killed you outright. It would have induced a massive stroke within minutes of ingestion. It would have looked like a natural, if sudden, medical event for a man your age. Untraceable in a standard autopsy." Alexander stared at the chemical breakdown on the screen. It was sophisticated, clinical, terrifyingly impersonal, and Jenna Kowalski. Her story checks out. Her son Daniel is on a wait list for a new experimental T-cell therapy. The cost is astronomical. The hospital foundation has denied her aid application 3 times. She's desperate, a perfect target for coercion. And Kevin Donovan, a mid-level manager with a gambling problem. He's neck-deep in debt to some very unpleasant people. Wires from an offshore account have been paying off his debts for the past 6 months. We're tracing it now, but the money is being laundered through at least a dozen shell corporations. It's a professional job. It's Varga Alexander, said the name, tasting like ash. Silas Varga is alive. Ben's composure finally broke. A flicker of disbelief crossed his face. "Silas Varga, sir, all records show he was declared dead 30 years ago. Dental records confirmed it." "Dental records can be faked," Alexander shot back. Jenna's mother never believed it. The use of the code name Nightingale. "It has to be him. He's the only other person who could have known about its significance to Laura and me. He was always jealous of our connection. Using it now is a message. It's personal." He ran a hand over his face, the fatigue of the night settling in. "Varga isn't just trying to kill me. The assassination attempt was Plan A. But the fact that he's compromised Project Nightingale, that's Plan B. A much bigger plan. He's not just after revenge, he's after my legacy. He's after the company." Ben's face hardened as the implications sank in. Project Nightingale is the key to our entire financial infrastructure. If an outside party has access, they could trigger a cascading failure. They could short our stock, initiate a hostile takeover. They could wipe out Davenport Industries from the inside out. "He's a ghost in the machine," Ben Alexander whispered, staring out at the blurred city lights. "For 30 years he's been a ghost, and now he's haunting my company. Donovan is just a puppet. He needed me out of the way. my death creating a power vacuum and chaos at the company, making it vulnerable for his real attack. The car pulled into the private underground garage of his penthouse. The world of Artie was gone. The cold, hard reality of Alexander Davenport's life had returned. "Get Jenna and her son, Alexander," ordered as the doors opened. "I don't want a security team that looks like a security team. I want them to look like social workers, doctors, anything. Get them out of their apartment and into one of my secure properties. The Pembroke Suite. Tell them the hospital has approved Daniel's treatment as part of a new philanthropic grant. Spare no expense. That boy will get the best care in the world. And Jenna, tell her the grant is named the Laura Kowalski Foundation." "Yes, sir." And Ben Alexander said, pausing at the elevator, "Sweep this entire building. Every wire, every server. Check my personal staff, my drivers, my pilots. Varga has had 30 years to plan this. He could have assets anywhere. We are at war with a ghost." As the elevator ascended, Alexander felt a profound and chilling realization. The note on the napkin hadn't just saved his life. It had been a flare illuminating a battlefield he never knew existed. And the war had already begun. The Pembroke Suite was less an apartment and more a self-contained luxury fortress on the 50th floor of a building Alexander owned under a shell corporation. It offered panoramic views of the city, a city that now felt hostile and unfamiliar. For Jenna, who had arrived in the dead of night with a sleeping Daniel in her arms, ushered in by a woman who introduced herself as a patient advocate. It was like stepping onto another planet. She hadn't slept. She'd spent the hours before dawn watching her son sleep in a bed larger than her entire living room, his breathing steady and peaceful for the first time in months. The news about the philanthropic grant covering his treatment was a miracle so profound she still couldn't fully process it. But beneath the tidal wave of relief was a current of fear. She was a guest here, but she was also a prisoner in a gilded cage. There was a soft knock on the door. Alexander Davenport entered no longer the weary Artie, but the man from the magazines, impeccably dressed in a tailored grey suit, his face clean-shaven, his grey hair perfectly styled. The power emanating from him was palpable. "Ms. Kowalski." "Jenna," he said, his voice softer than she expected. "I trust the accommodations are satisfactory." "There. It's too much," she stammered, gesturing vaguely at the opulent surroundings. "And my son's treatment. The Laura Kowalski Foundation. I don't know what to say." "Say nothing," Alexander said, his gaze softening as he looked toward the bedroom where Daniel slept. "Your mother was a very special person. I owed her a debt I never got to repay. Consider this a long overdue installment." He motioned to a seating area by the floor-to-ceiling windows. "We need to talk. What you did last night, you can't possibly understand the magnitude of it." They sat the sprawling city, a silent witness below them. "Silas Varga is alive," Alexander stated, the words hanging in the air. "My team is still trying to get confirmation, but I know it in my gut. What I need from you, Jenna, is anything else you can remember. Anything Donovan said. Any name, any date, any word, no matter how insignificant it seems." Jenna racked her brain, her mind a blur of exhaustion and stress. He was always careful. He used a burner phone. But there was one thing. A few days ago, he was on the phone, angry. He was yelling at someone. He said, "The package has to be delivered on time. The Sparrow cannot fly a day late." Alexander leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers. "The Sparrow? Are you certain?" "Yes. I remember because it was a weird thing to say. The Sparrow cannot fly a day late." "What does it mean?" Alexander leaned back, a grim smile touching his lips. It was a ghost from a lifetime ago. The Sparrow wasn't a code name for a package. It's a person, a legendary corporate hacker from the early days of the internet. Real name Nicholas Thorne, but he went by the Sparrow. He was a phantom, the best cyber infiltrator in the world. Rumor was he retired years ago after a job went bad. If Varga has pulled the Sparrow out of retirement, the implication was terrifying. Project Nightingale was a fortress, but the Sparrow was the one man who might be able to pick the lock. Donovan mentioned a meeting. Alexander pressed. "When and where tomorrow night?" Jenna said. "At the diner, after hours." He said something about a final transfer. I think that's when it's supposed to happen. Whatever it is, this was it, the end game. Varga was using the unassuming diner, a place with personal significance to Alexander, as the command center for his attack. The audacity was pure Silas. "Jenna, your part in this is over," Alexander said, his tone resolute. "You and Daniel will be moved to a secure location out of the country until this is finished. New names, new lives, anything you want. You will be safe." Jenna looked at him, and for the first time since this ordeal began, the fear in her eyes was replaced by a quiet resolve. "No." Alexander was taken aback. "I don't think you understand the danger. I understand perfectly," she interrupted. "That man Donovan, he threatened my son. He used my desperation against me. And the man behind him, Silas Varga, he's a ghost who haunted my mother her entire life. This isn't just your fight anymore. I'm not running. I want to help you stop him." He saw the steel in her spine, the same unwavering strength he remembered in her mother. He saw a woman who was tired of being a victim. "What can you do?" he asked, testing her. "Donovan trusts me. He thinks I'm a scared single mum he can push around. He doesn't know I warned you. He'll be at the diner tomorrow night for that meeting. I can be there too. I can be your eyes and ears." It was an insane risk, but it was also a perfect opportunity. Donovan wouldn't suspect her. She could get closer than any of Ben's agents ever could. Alexander's mind worked furiously, weighing the strategic advantage against the moral hazard of putting her in harm's way. He looked at this woman, a waitress who made $10 an hour, offering to walk into the heart of a multi-billion-dollar corporate war. Her courage was humbling. "If you do this," he said slowly, "it has to be on my terms. You will be equipped with a panic button and a covert listening device. Ben and his team will be positioned all around the diner. At the first sign of trouble, they go in and you get out." "Agreed." Jenna nodded, her expression firm. "Agreed." He stood up, the plan already forming in his head. They weren't just going to stop Varga's attack. They were going to use Donovan's meeting to lay a trap. They would let the Sparrow make his move, but they would be waiting to catch him. As he was about to leave, he paused at the door. "There's one more thing. A follow-up to my old code with your mother. If I had seen her again, I would have told her the Sparrow still flies south for the winter." It was meant to mean that no matter how far I went, I'd always come back. Varga must have known that too. He's not just using our past against me. He's mocking it. He looked at Jenna, the living legacy of the woman he'd left behind. He's mocking us. Let's show him what a Sparrow can really do. The 24 hours leading up to the meeting were a whirlwind of controlled chaos. Benjamin Carter's team transformed a vacant office space across from the Gilded Spoon into a state-of-the-art tactical operations center. High-resolution surveillance cameras disguised as city utility boxes were installed, giving them eyes on every angle of the street. A team of the world's best white-hat hackers flown in from Tel Aviv and Berlin on a Davenport jet, huddled around monitors preparing to fight a digital war against a ghost. Jenna was prepped by Ben's top field agent, a stern but reassuring woman named Cole. She was fitted with a microphone, hidden in a simple silver locket, a gift Alexander had sent over, saying it had belonged to her mother. A panic button was disguised as the clasp on her watch. She was instructed on what to say, how to act, and most importantly, when to get out. Despite the fear gnawing at her, she felt a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. She was no longer a victim of circumstance. She was an active participant in her own fate. Alexander watched from the command center, the weight of the operation pressing down on him. He was using Jenna as bait, and the thought was a bitter pill. But she had been right. She was their best and only way in. The plan was simple in its design, but fiendishly complex in its execution. They would allow Donovan to initiate the final protocol with the Sparrow. As the malicious code was uploaded to Davenport Industries' servers, Alexander's team would quarantine it in a secure, isolated digital environment, a honeypot, while simultaneously tracing its origin point. They had to catch the Sparrow in the act. At the same time, Ben's tactical team would move in on Donovan and anyone he was meeting. As night fell, the diner closed as usual. The streets grew quiet. Jenna, feigning a forgotten purse, knocked on the back door at the prearranged time. Donovan let her in, his face slick with sweat. "What are you doing here, Kowalski?" He snapped, his nerves frayed. "I'm sorry, Mr. Donovan. I think I left my wallet in the locker," she said, her voice a perfect imitation of timid deference. "Fine, get it and get out." "I'm busy," he grumbled, turning his back to her and heading to his office. Jenna's locket was live. Her voice, Donovan's voice, the hum of the diner's refrigerator, it all fed directly into Alexander's earpiece. "She's in," Ben confirmed, his voice calm in the tense command center. "Tactical teams are in position." Jenna retrieved her wallet, then lingered, pretending to look for her keys. From her vantage point, she could see into Donovan's office. He was sitting in front of a ruggedized laptop, something far too advanced for a simple diner manager. He put on a headset. Donovan is on his laptop. He's communicating with someone. Alexander said, his eyes glued to a monitor, displaying a heat signature of the diner. Through Jenna's microphone, they heard Donovan's side of the conversation. "I'm in place. Yeah, everything is set. The package is ready for delivery." A pause. "Okay, initiating now." In the command center, the digital battlefield erupted. "We have an incoming signal," one of the Israeli hackers shouted. "It's him. It's the Sparrow. The coding architecture is unmistakable. He's breaching the outer firewall of Project Nightingale." "Let him in," Alexander ordered, his voice like ice. "Quarantine him the second he's through." On the main screen, lines of code scrolled at an impossible speed. It was a digital dance of attack and defense. The Sparrow was brilliant, bypassing security protocols that were considered unbreachable. But Alexander's team was ready for him. "He's in the honeypot," the hacker confirmed. "He thinks he's in the main server. He's uploading the payload now, tracing his physical location. He's good. He's bouncing his signal through a dozen countries. But we're better. Got him. He's in a loft in downtown Geneva, Switzerland. Dispatch the Swiss authorities. My personal authorization," Alexander commanded. "I want him." Back in the diner, Donovan let out a sigh of relief. "It's done," he said into his headset. "The transfer is complete. Davenport is finished." A cold, familiar voice replied, not through the headset, but from a speaker on the laptop. The voice was digitally altered, but it was clear enough to be heard through Jenna's hidden microphone. And it made Alexander Davenport's blood run cold. "You've done well, Kevin," the voice said. "You have served your purpose." "So the money?" Donovan asked, his voice greedy. "The transfer to my account." "There's been a change of plans," the voice replied, its tone turning venomous. "You see, the only thing I dislike more than Alexander Davenport is a loose end." Jenna watched in horror as Donovan's face contorted in confusion, then fear. "What are you talking about, Varga? We had a deal. We did the voice of Silas." Varga hissed from the speaker. "And now it's over." "Sir, the laptop," Ben's technician yelled in the command center. "It's overloading. The battery is going into thermal runaway. It's a bomb. Jenna, get out, now." Alexander roared into his own microphone, overriding the channel. In the diner, Jenna didn't hesitate. She sprinted for the back door as Donovan, realizing he'd been betrayed, fumbled with the laptop, trying to disconnect it. She burst out into the alley, just as Ben's tactical team, clad in black, swarmed in from both ends. An instant later, a muffled explosion blew out the windows of the manager's office, filling the diner with smoke and flames. Ben's team stormed the building, securing the bewildered and smoke-covered Donovan, who had been thrown clear of the blast, but was now a whimpering, defeated man. Jenna was pulled to safety behind a tactical vehicle, her heart pounding, her ears ringing. She had done it. She had survived. In the command center, the crisis was over, but the war was not. Alexander stared at the screen where the trace on Varga's voice call was still running. It had been routed through the same servers as the Sparrow's signal, a clever misdirection. But Varga had made one mistake. He had stayed on the line a few seconds too long to savor his betrayal of Donovan. "We have him." The lead hacker said, his voice a mixture of triumph and exhaustion. He wasn't in Geneva. He piggybacked on the Sparrow's signal. "He's local. Very local. Sir, the signal is originating from the penthouse suite of the Blackwood Tower." Alexander stared at the address on the screen. It was a rival hotel directly across the park from his own penthouse building. Silas Varga had been watching him this whole time. From less than a mile away, his old partner, his nemesis, had been orchestrating his downfall, watching him from a window. Ben Alexander said, his voice dangerously calm, "Seal that building. No one gets in or out. I'm going over there myself." This was no longer about business. This was personal, and it was time to face the ghost. The ride to Blackwood Tower was the longest 5 minutes of Alexander Davenport's life. The city lights were a blur, a meaningless backdrop to the storm raging inside him. 30 years of buried history of guilt and ambition were about to come to a head. He wasn't just going to confront a business rival. He was going to confront the man whose supposed death had been the foundation of his entire empire. Ben Carter rode beside him, silent and grim. His teams had locked down the tower with a speed and efficiency that was both beautiful and terrifying. Varga was trapped. They bypassed the lobby, taking a service elevator to the penthouse floor. 2 of Ben's men, armed and in tactical gear, stood guard at the door to the suite. Ben gave them a nod, and they stepped aside. "Sir, I should go in first," Ben advised. No, Ben Alexander set his hand on the door handle. "This is a conversation 30 years in the making. I'm having it alone." He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The penthouse was vast and minimalist, decorated in shades of grey and black, and there, standing by a massive window overlooking the park and beyond it, Alexander's own building, was a man. He was older, his hair a shock of white, his face etched with lines Alexander didn't recognize. But the eyes, the intense, burning, intelligent eyes, were the same. It was Silas Varga. Alex Varga said, his voice no longer digitally altered, but raspy with age and malice. "I have to admit you look good. A bit tired, perhaps. The weight of an empire, I imagine." Silas Alexander replied, his voice steady, despite the tremor in his soul. "The reports of your death were, it seems, greatly exaggerated." Varga chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "The factory fire. A wonderful piece of theatre. It took years to set up the fake dental records that bribed coroner. But I needed you to believe I was gone. I needed you to build it all up, just so I could be the one to tear it all down. He gestured around the opulent room. I've done well for myself in the shadows. Arms deals, black market tech, nation-state cyber warfare. But it was never enough. Because every time I saw the name Davenport on a building on a news report, I saw what you stole from me. I stole nothing, Alexander countered, his voice rising. We were partners. That fire was a tragedy. It was my escape. Varga spat, his composure finally cracking. You were squeezing me out, Alex, taking my ideas and passing them off as your own in front of investors. You were always the polished one, the salesman. I was just the volatile genius in the back room. You were going to cut me loose. So I decided to disappear, to let you build your kingdom on my ashes, knowing that one day I would return to claim the throne. Alexander stood silent for a moment, the accusation hanging in the air. Was it true? Had his ambition blinded him to his partner's desperation? Had he, in his youthful hunger for success, pushed the only real friend he'd ever had to the breaking point? The uncomfortable truth was, maybe. So this was all for revenge, Alexander asked quietly. Poisoning me, crashing my company, hurting innocent people like Jenna Kowalski. All for something that happened 3 decades ago. Don't you dare speak her name, Varga sneered. You left Laura behind without a second thought. You were so busy climbing you never looked back. I looked her up, you know. Years later. Saw she had a daughter. Saw she died alone. And you didn't even know. That waitress is a symbol of everything you sacrificed, everything you threw away. The words were a dagger to Alexander's heart, because they were true. You're right, Alexander conceded, his voice heavy with a profound, soul-crushing regret. I left too much behind. I lost the best parts of myself chasing success, and for that I am truly sorry, Silas. Varga looked momentarily thrown by the apology. He had expected a fight, a denial, not this raw confession. It's too late for apologies, Alex, he said, his voice regaining its edge. He held up a small tablet. Even though my hacker was caught, this device is still linked. One press of a button and I can still erase the financial backbone of your company. It won't be a takeover, but it will be annihilation. If I'm going down, I'm taking you with me. Alexander looked at the tablet, then back at the man who was once his friend. He saw not a monster, but a man twisted by 30 years of hatred, a man who had let bitterness consume him entirely. No, you won't, Alexander, said calmly. He took a step forward, his hands open at his sides. Because you've already lost, Silas. You spent 30 years in the dark, fueled by hate. I spent 30 years building things, creating jobs, pushing technology forward. I made mistakes, horrible ones. But my legacy is real. All you have is this room. All you have is an empty threat. You can press that button, you can cause chaos, but Davenport Industries will be rebuilt. A legacy of hate, however, dies alone in a room like this. He turned his back on Varga, an act of ultimate dismissal, and walked toward the door. It's over. For a heart-stopping second, there was only silence. Alexander expected the click of the button, the roar of rage. Instead, he heard a sound he never thought he'd hear again. The sound of Silas Varga, the ghost weeping. It was the sound of 30 years of poison finally draining away, leaving nothing but an empty, broken old man. Ben's team entered, and Varga didn't resist. He dropped the tablet and let them lead him away, his eyes hollow and defeated. The war was finally truly over. In the end, it wasn't the billions of dollars, the high-tech security, or the corporate power that saved Alexander Davenport. It was a single act of courage from an ordinary woman in a forgotten diner. The story of the undercover billionaire became a quiet legend within the company, a reminder of what was truly at stake. Alexander didn't just rebuild his company's security, he rebuilt its soul. The Laura Kowalski Foundation became his life's new passion, pouring hundreds of millions into medical aid for underprivileged families, ensuring no other parent would have to face the impossible choices Jenna had. Jenna herself, refusing a life of quiet luxury, accepted a position running the foundation, her strength and compassion guiding it to help thousands. Daniel, her son, made a full recovery. Sometimes the most profound changes in our lives don't come from grand schemes, but from a quiet voice, a moment of integrity, a simple note that stops us cold and forces us to see the world and ourselves as we truly are. If this story of how one small act of bravery unraveled a 30-year-old mystery moved you, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who appreciates a story where courage outweighs circumstance. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel and ring the bell for more incredible tales that prove the most dramatic stories are the ones happening all around us every single day. Thank you for listening.